200 billion euros. Honestly, just let that staggering number sink in for a second. That is the volume of highly suspicious transactions that flowed completely undetected through just one single branch of a major European bank between 2007 and 2015. We aren't talking about the entire global economy here. This was literally just one branch in Estonia, moving dirty money, mostly from Russia and other former Soviet states, straight into the legitimate financial system. It's a number that perfectly captures just how massive this hidden, global problem of dirty money really is.
Welcome to this explainer. I am so glad you're here with us today. We're going to take a really structured, step-by-step approach to demystifying one of the most complex yet fascinating global financial phenomena out there, money laundering. We are going to map out exactly how illicit funds move from ground-level street crimes all the way up into luxury real estate and offshore accounts. And more importantly, we'll look at how global authorities are actually fighting back. Okay, let's dive right into our roadmap. First, we'll look at the money laundering machine itself. Second, the criminal toolkit on the ground. Think Smurfs and shells. Third, we'll uncover some offshore banking secrets. Fourth, we'll review history's absolute biggest laundering scandals. And finally, we'll look at the high-tech defenses being used to catch these criminals.
All right, starting off with Section 1, the money laundering machine, and the whole concept of cleaning dirty money.
So imagine you're a criminal syndicate generating millions of dollars from illegal activities, right? Things like drug trafficking or corruption. Well, you've got a massive logistical problem on your hands. You can't exactly walk into a luxury car dealership and buy a whole fleet of vehicles with duffel bags full of street cash without drawing immediate police attention. That money has to be cleaned. Essentially, money laundering is just a sophisticated process of disguise. Criminals desperately need to hide the illegal origins of their so-called dirty money. They need it to look like it came from a totally legitimate business or investment so that mainstream banks will actually accept it. To pull this off, they might use illicit cash to buy gold, silver, casino chips, or real estate. By buying and selling these things multiple times, they create this totally convoluted paper trail. It makes it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to trace those funds back to the original crime.
Now, this cleaning process almost always happens in 3 distinct stages. First up is placement. This is the actual physical act of getting that illegally obtained cash into the financial system or the retail economy. And here is absolutely a key takeaway for you. Money is actually at its most vulnerable to detection and seizure by the police right here, during this initial placement stage. Step 2 is layering. Once the money is actually in the system, criminals move it across multiple accounts, countries, and shell companies just to separate the cash from its criminal source. And finally, integration. The now clean funds re-enter the legal economy. The criminal buys a luxury yacht, a business, or high-end art, and to the outside world, well, it looks perfectly legal.
Moving on to Section 2, Smurfs, Structures, and Shells. This is the criminal toolkit. We know the 3 broad stages now. But how exactly do criminals execute that highly vulnerable first stage of placement, right there on the ground?
Criminals often rely on 2 very specific, very illegal techniques to bypass banking rules, and it's important we contrast them. On the one hand, we have structuring. This is where a single individual divides a big chunk of money into smaller deposits to essentially fly under the radar. So in the US, for example, banks have to report cash transactions over $10,000. A structurer might just deposit $9,000 at 3 different branches. Now contrast that with smurfing. This is way more complex. A criminal network recruits multiple individuals, who are actually called Smurfs, and these folks might not even know the full extent of the crime they're a part of. These Smurfs deposit smaller amounts across various accounts using different identities. So structuring is basically one person dodging the limit, while smurfing uses a whole complex web of people.
But where do all these Smurfs actually go to deposit this money? Well, they often target money services businesses, or MSBs. You see these places everywhere. They're the spots providing money orders, traveler's checks, check cashing, and currency exchange. Because they don't always have the massive, robust compliance departments of a multinational bank, they end up being prime targets for launderers who are trying to move funds around without dealing with standard banking scrutiny.
So, how does this actually translate into real-world detection? Put yourself in the shoes of a financial detective for a second, and look at these FinCEN red flags. How do you spot a Smurf in real time? Well, you look for customers using false or obviously altered IDs. You watch out for people who suddenly change their minds and break a large transaction into smaller ones the absolute second they are asked for an ID. You keep an eye out for customers offering bribes or tips to the staff just to look the other way. And here's one of the most fascinating details to me.
You actually look for customers paying with physically musty bills that have a chemical-like odor. That is often a massive indicator that the cash was literally buried somewhere or stashed alongside illegal narcotics.
Okay, let's escalate things a bit. We're moving from the micro level of street cash and local currency exchanges straight into Section 3, offshore banking secrets. This is the macro level, where millions suddenly turn into billions.
Once criminals successfully get their money into the system, they very often move it to offshore financial centers, which you probably know as tax havens. We're talking jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, or Panama. And why do they do this? Well, these places provide minimal regulatory oversight, completely anonymous account ownership, highly favorable tax policies, and crucial protection for shell companies and trusts. Now, it's really important to point out that offshore banking absolutely has completely legitimate uses like simple asset diversification. But unfortunately, the exact same features that protect a legitimate wealthy individual's privacy perfectly facilitate massive, untraceable money laundering for the bad guys.
Another huge macro-level tactic used across international borders is trade-based money laundering. This is where criminals totally exploit the global trade system. Imagine a criminal has dirty money in country A and desperately wants it in country B. They might set up a shell company and create a completely fake import or export deal. They'll over-invoice or under-invoice for goods, or sometimes they'll invoice for shipments of things that literally do not exist. It's wild, but it allows them to move massive amounts of illicit funds across international borders entirely unnoticed, all disguised as routine, boring corporate commerce.
Which perfectly brings us to Section 4, the biggest laundering scandals. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is seeing how the mechanics we just talked about actually enabled true crime in high finance.
I mean, what's truly unbelievable here is the sheer audacity of these crimes. Just look at the scale of this escalation. Take HSBC in 2012. Their anti-money laundering procedures were so incredibly weak that Mexican cartels were literally depositing hundreds of thousands of dollars in physical cash on a daily basis. The cartels even designed special boxes perfectly tailored to slide right through the bank's teller windows. Then there's Danske Bank, which we mentioned right at the start. 200 billion euros flowing through an Estonian branch. Look at the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia, where billions stolen from a sovereign wealth fund were laundered through global banks just to buy luxury yachts, artwork, and even fund major Hollywood film productions. You literally couldn't make this up. And finally, Wirecard, a massive European fintech darling that totally collapsed when auditors realized 1.9 billion euros sitting in offshore trustee accounts simply never existed in the first place.
Obviously, it's a massive cat-and-mouse game, but the authorities are definitely stepping up. Let's pivot to Section 5, catching the criminals, and take a look at the regulatory defenses designed to stop these massive scandals.
Look, to fight a global problem, you absolutely need global solutions. International governments have established some really foundational regulations to force transparency. Way back in 1989, they established the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, to set global standards. Today, financial institutions are armed with some very specific tools. For instance, they must file suspicious activity reports, or SARs, anytime they spot potentially illegal activity over $2,000. They also have to file currency transaction reports, or CTRs, for cash deposits over $10,000. And underpinning all of this alphabet soup is KYC, Know Your Customer. Banks are legally required to verify exactly who owns an account and where their money is actually coming from. And we are genuinely seeing these regulations put into serious practice all over the globe. For instance, Thailand's Anti-Money Laundering Office, or AMLO, is a fantastic example of modern enforcement. They aren't just looking at local banks anymore. They are actively cooperating with foreign regulators to track down hidden offshore accounts held by high-net-worth individuals. Plus, they're aggressively adapting to new technologies, enforcing strict KYC requirements on cryptocurrency exchanges to prevent illicit offshore crypto transactions. It's a really great example of international collaboration closing the gaps that criminals used to exploit so easily.
But as we've clearly seen, criminals evolve, and so the defenses absolutely have to evolve too. Welcome to the future of anti-money laundering. Traditional rule-based systems, like simply flagging any transaction over $10,000, well, they just don't cut it anymore. Today, institutions are deploying advanced AI and machine learning for real-time transaction monitoring. They're using sophisticated graph analytics to map out massive, complex network relationships so they can instantly spot a ring of Smurfs or a shady web of shell companies. They're even utilizing behavioral risk scoring to spot anomalies, detecting when an account suddenly starts acting entirely out of character, way before a human investigator would ever notice.
Which really leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to consider. Will AI and global regulations ever truly outpace the constantly evolving tactics of financial criminals? Because, as you've seen throughout this explainer, the exact moment a new regulation is passed, launderers are already searching for the next loophole. It is an endless, high-stakes game of global finance. I really hope this explainer has helped you grasp the mechanics of this hidden world. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me today.